Welcome back to News Talk here on News Channel 8, Monday edition of the show. Good to have you there, everybody. Good to have Northern Virginia Congressman Jerry Connolly here. I want to ask you about Metro in a moment, and we will talk about both the new leadership at Metro and the funding that the region's congressional delegation was able to secure. Very important money, right. By no means a foregone conclusion. We'll talk about that. But I want to double back for a second. We talked in the last segment about the Affordable Care Act. You mentioned during the discussion of President Obama's what you consider to be his legacy, the fact that we now, for the first time ever, have the number of uninsured going down, and going down pretty appreciably for the first time ever. And you mentioned that Virginia still is turning aside, is still rejecting significant federal money that other states are availing themselves of. Your colleagues voted recently, and by one tally, it was the 62nd time that the House has voted to repeal the Affordable Care Act, as if anyone thinking rationally, and this isn't to weigh in on the merits of what people call Obamacare, but just no president is going to veto his signature achievement.
No, is going to veto.
Is going to veto.
Yeah.
So, you know, what does the 40th repeal do that the first 20 or 30 or didn't get you? What's the incremental achievement of the 62nd repeal?
You know, this is the Karl Rove legacy of American politics. Pander to your base. Those votes aren't about the country. They aren't about moving forward. They aren't about cooperation and compromise. They're all about firing up the base. And the rank and file in the Republican Party, as we're certainly seeing in this presidential primary season, is significantly far to the right compared to where most Americans are. And this is red meat for them. And so 62, 122, they're going to continue to do it for that reason, not for significant policy reasons. And here's the test. So after we passed health care in 2010, so it's been 6 years, where is your plan if you don't like this one? The Republicans have never put a health care reform plan as an alternative on the table, ever. Furthermore,
they talk about repeal and replace.
They talk about it.
They always say repeal and replace.
But they haven't got that replace part. Eludes them. And here's the other part, Bruce. They are silent with respect to the popular reforms. So how are you going to finance requiring insurance companies to stop cancellation of policies based on previous existing conditions? How are you going to finance insurance companies no longer being able to put an arbitrary annual cap or lifetime cap on your benefits should you get sick? You and I both have parents who have had significant medical issues, very expensive, and if you voucherize Medicare, good luck in trying to get any insurer to cover you, no matter how valuable that voucher might be. And so these are unanswered questions. Conveniently, my friends on the other side don't want to answer because they don't have answers.
How does Paul Ryan avoid or evade what happened to John Boehner?
I think, I think Paul Ryan is a skilled politician. He comes from the right, unlike John Boehner, who kind of came from the center. John Boehner was an institutionalist who wanted to make things work and liked carving legislation with Democrats, with other Republicans, to move things forward. And he found that the dynamics in the Republican caucus have significantly shifted. And that's a harder thing to do and get away with, frankly, and be rewarded for. In fact, you're going to be punished for doing that politically. And Ryan's going to have to navigate the same waters, the same treacherous waters John Boehner had to navigate. And I think he's going to face some of the same criticism and reaction John Boehner got as he moves forward this year.
If you could give Boehner truth serum, I would love to know whether his decision not to bring the bipartisan immigration reform bill that came out of the Senate up, he stuck that bill in a drawer. That bill died on a vote of 0 to 1 because he wanted to protect his caucus from primaries where
That's right.
And so there was no vote on now, not to say they should have approved it, but what would the vote have been? That's something we never talk about. Bipartisan big bipartisan bills rarely come out of the Senate anymore. Here was a chance to test a theory in the real world, and it came out of the Senate with Republicans and Democrats supporting.
Absolutely.
And we don't know, A, how the House would have voted, and Boehner, could have voted no and urged no votes and all the rest of it. But what would the vote have been? And if the bill had gone through, what would the result have been in terms of our immigration challenge?
I think there would have been a bipartisan majority, maybe not huge, in the House to pass that bill because it had momentum coming out of the Senate, as you suggest. I mean, even figures like Marco Rubio helped write the bill and defended it. And so you had a good bipartisan vote coming out of the Senate. It tells you a lot, though, about the base of my friends on the other side of the aisle, that Marco Rubio essentially has had to renounce his signature legislative involvement in his time in the Senate.
Let's talk about Metro. Metro is now under new leadership. Have you had a chance to meet with Paul Wiedefeld?
I have.
Can you talk about the money that will flow from the federal treasury to the Metro system? What does that money mean? What did your conversation with Paul Wiedefeld involve in terms of the things this region needs to see from our transit agency?
Well, let me begin by saying, Bruce, that we had two pieces of really good news that came out of our adoption of both the funding of the government and the tax extenders bill toward the end of last year. Number one, we fully restored the $150 million federal contribution to the capital investment plan. That's a 10-year plan. The federal government's supposed to provide $150 million a year for 10 years, and the localities are supposed to match it. Had we cut that, which was the original action in the House Transportation and Appropriations Committees, the localities would have matched those cuts. And this is not a time where we need to be cutting back on Metro investment. And it's a modest investment to begin with, and I credit my predecessor, Tom Davis, with having crafted that $150 million plan. Secondly, we restored the transit parity benefit. That means that a lot more workers are going to be able to get reimbursed fully for their use of transit. Metro benefits from that, too, because we've seen a dip in ridership. This, I hope, will halt that and begin a recovery. With respect to Mr. Wiedefeld, I think he's the right man for the job. He has transit background, which I think is critical. He's a good listener, and he spent a lot of time listening to stakeholders on the Hill, riders, other politicians, people who help fund the program. He and I are going to go actually on a ride on the Orange Line in another week or so that he can hear some of the concerns my constituents have in riding the Orange Line.
Will you introduce commuters to him? Will they know that this regular-looking guy standing next to them is who he is?
Oh, yes. And I think both of us are looking forward to getting feedback from riders. So there's a capacity issue that is paramount, frankly, in my district.
Given what you hear, what are they likely to say is job one, or what are the top three items on?
Well, on the Orange Line, it's going to be capacity. It's going to be quality control issues that have significantly deteriorated, and it's going to be a broader concern about safety and how safe is the system.
The next time you're here, we will have had voting in Iowa. We may have had the New Hampshire first-in-the-nation primary, depending on when we're able to get back on your schedule. The one item we're not going to have time for today that we will touch on next time is the Trump phenomenon. I want to get your take on the Donald Trump phenomenon. How's that for a teaser?
Then I have to come back.
You have to come back. I hope you will. Thanks very much for your time this
Bruce.
time, and we'll continue the conversation.
Thank you so much.
Next time you're here. Northern Virginia Congressman Jerry Connolly joining us today here on the program. By the way, we have invited Northern Virginia Congresswoman Barbara Comstock to discuss the same issues we just discussed today with Congressman Connolly, but she has repeatedly declined our invitations. After news and the forecast, analysis of Washington's loss to the Green Bay Packers.